Welcome, brothers and sisters, to the Meher Baba program. I'm your host, Fred Stankus, along with my co-host, Suhas Ginde. How are you, Suhas?
Very well, thank
Wonderful.
you.
We're continuing our program from last week where we were talking about the 7 heavens and 7 planes, and we're just finishing up the second plane and second heavens, just before we disembark on our journey to the third plane and third heavens. And of course, the audience may want to know what we're talking about. We're talking about the involution of consciousness. These are exalted states of experience, but also we all experience somewhat of the subtle world in our experience of transition of to the death experience. In other words, once we transition over to the heaven or hell state, we experience gross physical impressions in the subtle world, but we don't experience the subtle world. But anyway, we're going to be finishing up now from the Everything into Nothing. This is a publication that we're referring to in this program. It was authored by Baal Kalchuri, and it's copyrighted by Manifestation Incorporated and Hermes Writer. And we are now finishing up on the second plane and second heavens, and we'll be discussing further of some of this really special information. Go ahead.
So I'll start where we left off last week. This was towards the end of the chapter on the second planes. So once relief is experienced from the good and bad sanskaras, the person can distinguish in this state good from bad or natural from unnatural. The consumption of good and bad sanskaras balances the consciousness. If the opposite impressions balance while in a human form, one becomes God realized. But if they nearly balance disembodied in heaven or hell, one simply takes another birth. If a gross conscious person enjoys the heaven state after death through the medium of his subtle body, and if he has to spend the gross sanskaras of enjoying the intoxication of liquor, just a thought of liquor gives him thousands of times more enjoyment than the enjoyment of drinking liquor in the body. The reverse is true in the hell state, when just a thought of pain can cause thousands of times more anguish than actual physical suffering. In this way, gross conscious people can quickly spend their good and bad sanskaras with heightened intensity, and thereby distinguish good actions done while incarnate from bad.
You know, before we begin the third plane, the third heaven, this is something that we should just review here. You're explaining the heaven or hell state, how one has, it's a state of mind, how if one has more impressions that are good, it's a heaven state, and more impressions that are bad, it's the hell state. But those places, or that state, is really a proving ground, a learning center. It basically makes you sensitive to the good or bad that you may do in the world. Meaning, the fact is, if a person performs a lot of bad actions, he has to pay for that and experience those things much more intensified in the hell state. So when he comes back with his next birth, and what you also were reading there, how this occurs when he spends his impressions, say his bad impressions, and just before he's going to balance his account as good and bad, he is reincarnated.
He is propelled into taking on a birth.
Right.
That is reincarnation.
Right.
And should he near balance them while he's in the human form, then he will become God realized. That's what he says.
So the key to it is to try to balance those
in the human form.
So, you know, this gives me a thought to think right now. If you, I'm just putting you on the spot now, Suhas, we didn't talk about this. If you were a 50-50 soul, would that mean that 50% bad, 50% good are balanced? Would that mean you would have no desires anymore? You know what I'm saying? Why would you be ready to be God realized, or illumined, I should say? Why would you have illumination then?
Well, that
in your own logic.
I think that 50% comes after coming in contact with the master. He balances. The master does everything within the human on his consciousness. And the good and bad impressions are balanced out. They have to be balanced out in the human form, so that because the grace of the master is necessary for you to achieve this God realization stage.
No, but what I'm saying is, if you are balanced,
Yes.
that means you have no sanskaras to spend.
Correct.
So in other words, the sanskaras are impressions.
They're zeroed out.
Impressions make you act, make you come back to this world, make you want to eat, make you want to fornicate, make you want to go to the bathroom, make you want to enjoy, okay? And make you want to drink liquor.
The impressions have to be experienced.
Okay, experience. So, but I'm saying, but if you balance your account, it's 50% bad, 50% good, perfect balance. So you have no more desire to do one way or the other, because the surplus of impressions create the desire to spend them. So when you don't have anything to spend, you're zeroed out. So that's when you're realized. Or is it realized or illumined?
Well, that's when you get God realization. It just means that you just have natural...
You know, it must be quite difficult, because isn't it, according to Baba, we have, well, billions, trillions of impressions, and these impressions are not only physical, they're subtle, they're mental impressions, they're so vast, there's so many,
and
that to reach this balanced state is almost, we're talking as sort of like maybe wishful thinking.
And yet people do achieve that, such as the perfect masters. They have balance, so that's when you become a God realized. There are, as Baba has himself said, there are 56 God realized beings on the planet at all times.
But how would you go about, if I was to ask you, Suhas, how can you stop from getting sanskaras or impressions in your life? Do you go to an enclosed room? Do you lock yourself in and totally stay devoid of contact? Because, you know, you get an impression every time you look at a beautiful woman, and you look at her, you think, or you sometimes see money, or you see, you know, somebody attaining this or that. You know, those are impressions. How can you possibly function? You've got to isolate yourself.
I think what has been said in the past by masters is that thoughts can come and go, but don't put them into practice or put them into action. You see, actions create impressions, and these impressions get stored in the mind, and then they need to be experienced again. So more actions are created. So the whole thing is to have, if you have the thought, is to just let it go, is to have just a thought but not hold on to it. Holding on to the thought creates the impressions and then leads to action.
So what you're saying then, if you do get an impression that's maybe just a mental impression,
if it's a passing fancy,
and
then
you don't put it into actual physical action, it'll dissipate. Those things will leave you.
It will not leave another impression on the mental plate of the mind, so to speak.
But I guess it stands to reason then why you hear of monasteries, why you hear of mendicants, why you hear of sannyasin, where you hear of monks, of people wanting to, you know, devoid themselves of the worldly mainstream and all its allurements, because all those impressions are there.
But again, on that matter, Baba has also said that if you try to repress these sanskaras by physical activity and doing the opposite and so on, they may not be weakened, but they may just be in a deposit form in the mind, and then they have to resurrect at some point in time again, because they have not been experienced.
Oh, so what you're saying is if a person runs away for one lifetime as a yogi in some mountaintop,
the ego is still there.
And keeps those impressions that are wanting to experience themselves at bay.
But it's called repression.
Repression. His next birth, he may be born into a brothel or something.
It could be that he needs to experience. He could experience them in the after death situation.
Ah, I see.
And so they may come out and it might cause him a lot more intense.
But the grace of a master possibly also could wear out some of those impressions, can it not?
The grace of the master is the most important thing, and that comes from devotion to the master. The master can wipe out the sanskaras within 1 second, or less than 1 second, because he has that power.
So basically, what the picture we're painting for our viewing audience is, if we erase all of our impressions, we're looking at
You're looking at an empty slate.
But we're looking at a perfect being.
Correct.
We're looking at a bright sun that shines within every being. We're looking at a perfection. We're looking at a beautiful, beautiful celestial being, which we all are. But we are clothed and covered by these layers and layers and layers of impressions. May they be gross, may they be mental or subtle impressions. And we get caught up in them, and we start believing that that is what we are, or we think that we're supposed to act. Is that it?
Well, that's what has made us take birth, as all our previous impressions from prior lives that were not experienced, or when there was a near balancing in the subtle planes of our consciousness, we took on this body. And now we are moving into the journey of life. And it's only through the grace of the Master that these impressions can be balanced out in the human form. That's why the most important form is the human form, according to Baba. It's the final form in evolution. Then involution takes place through these planes, the first through the seventh. And the seventh plane is where you achieve God realization.
So what you're describing then, if we would just picture a downward arc, evolution is coming here, from the initial gaseous state all the way to animals and to humans down here in the bottom.
Yes.
And then humans go through this reincarnation process, and then the upward journey begins involution.
Correct.
And so we're going and ascending to a place that's eventually called God realization. So evolution came from God and went down
back to God,
and then went to human form, which actually is the highest point of evolution, even though it appears to be lowest on this arc.
Well,
but then the consciousness ascends back up. One time I was thinking about the evolutionary energy here of a certain type of species run a straight line across to like the second plane, and they do say that animals sometimes have certain kinds of sensory awareness, instinct that is highly refined and pure. And Baba, so at times they do experience things
and Baba himself has said that all the way up to through the animal form, the sanskaras or the impressions are natural. It's when man achieves the human body, then he starts doing things with his own willpower and his ego and his mind, and then unnatural impressions start happening.
Wow, so an animal is natural impression.
Everything from
Mother Nature.
The process of evolution is natural. Animals do not have the kind of sanskaras that men do, though we have taken through the evolution sanskaras from the animal kingdom, which is what we have to experience and go beyond and refine them.
I guess it's like being a couch potato for 10 hours in front of a boob tube or eating, I guess red meat but animals do that too, though. But
yes.
But there's other unnatural things too that we all do. We know what they are.
But man creates those by his life, and therefore reincarnation takes place where man is living several lifetimes to achieve a higher plane of existence. But all that is part of the process of coming out of this consciousness called God, who was in the beginning not aware of his consciousness, and then becoming fully aware of his consciousness in the God realized state.
So, Suhas, we're going to begin the third plane, the third heavens now. And we're now going to a place that very few souls on this planet are conscious of right now. I mean, what would you say? There's a couple hundred or so that are conscious?
1 in a million.
Yeah, 1 in a million are conscious of what we're going to talk about right now, folks. So we're not talking about something that's everyday experience. So this
you're not going to run into these people.
Exactly.
Daily life.
So this information we're giving you is for, I guess, the inner hope of achievement that is your birthright. This, what we're talking about, is everyone's latent potential to be able to experience these. So we're going to the energy of the subtle world, a third plane, is where the subtle world is felt at its intensity. Anyway, why don't we begin?
On the third plane and the third heaven. After perhaps thousands of years and different lifetimes with the natural development of subtle consciousness, the pilgrim enters the third plane. Here, the pilgrim comes into control of more occult powers because he becomes aware of the entire subtle realm and its nature, pure energy and power. Consequently, the third plane pilgrim can perform major miracles, such as giving sight to the blind, making the crippled walk, bestowing speech to the mute or hearing to the deaf, and giving life again to dead animals. He also has the power to become invisible and appear in different places of the world. The subtle sight of third plane consciousness is tremendously expansive. To see here means to read, and he can read the minds of everyone at any distance in any place in the world. The first plane pilgrim can see any part of the gross world, while the second plane pilgrim can see any part of the gross world, and the first and second planes with the different heavens. But the third plane pilgrim's sight is so expansive and inclusive that he can see the entire gross world and the first, second, and third planes and their heavens.
You can see the entire gross universe.
The physical. However, he cannot see the fourth plane and its heavens. These are planes higher than the third plane. As he sees from the plane, he sees through the three heavens as if all is in front of him. He can thereby read the minds of all gross and subtle beings. Since the inner eye of the pilgrim's subtle body is completely opened at this stage, he uses subtle sight and uses the light of the third plane to see the gross and subtle forms of others. With his subtle sight, he lights up the gross bodies of others and their subtle forms, and thereby knows the inner minds of one and all beneath him. The human being in the third plane has a physical characteristic. The eyes of such a pilgrim always appear to be swollen.
Now we go to the third heaven, which is like the back side of the plane. Explain that.
Which is the extension of the plane in a larger realm. The third heaven, known as Alm-e-Kudasi, the pure world, is divided into three sections or parts. The first section is the state of Indra. In Sanskrit, Indra Lok, the abode of the rain god to Hindus, and in Persian, Makan-e-Huri, the house of the fairies. The second section is the abode of the angels, or the abode of the gods. In Sanskrit, Deva Lok. The Greek and Roman gods were these angels, or devas, and they are the Hindu gods. The third section is the actual section of Alm-e-Kudasi, where the pilgrim experiences subtle knowledge. This knowledge is not gnosis or gnosis, but occult or mystic knowledge. Each section in the third heaven holds millions of times more bliss, more happiness, more powers than the second heaven.
That is hard to fathom, Suhas.
Well, we cannot imagine that.
It says millions of times more bliss, more power. You know, it is unimaginable what you just read.
The state of subtle consciousness known as Indra is the state of the first section of the third heaven. Indra is known as the king of the gods or the king of the angels, the same as the Greek Zeus or the Roman Jupiter. In Persian, Indra's abode is Makan-e-Huri, the house of the fairies or the house of beautiful women. Indra's fairies are feminine, subtle beings, a type of an angel with exceptional beauty and charm. This state of Indra is referred to as a post of divinity, a station, of considerable power and certain duties concerning the elements of nature, specifically to do with earth. If a man successfully performs a severe penance such as Chilla Nashini, that is staying inside a circle for 40 days and nights, when he drops his physical body, that is, he dies, the man attains the Indra state. That is, if he is fasted for 40 days, 40 nights within a circle that he never leaves.
Who can do that?
Well, Baba's done it, and several masters have done that, which are very rare beings.
But an ordinary human being, you try to ask him to stay for 40 days and 40 nights without any kind of food or water. It would be,
it's a severe penance.
You have to be you have to be a master to achieve that.
Yes. This means that a gross conscious man becomes Indra and gains that subtle identity with the status of a king, the powers, the duties of that post, the throne. He has become the king of the gods, Zeus or Jupiter, who rules 330 million angels. Being king of the angels is an experience of Alme Kudasi, which is millions of times more blissful than any experience in the second heaven of Alme Ruhani, which we discussed last week. Through his subtle body, he consciously experiences that bliss of being deified and holds that post while in a disembodied state. For one epoch, which equals 4 cycles, each cycle is about 26,000 years, this human holds the post of Indra and is very possessive of it. Many times those men, ascetics in the gross world who are striving to attain the post of Indra will have their penance disturbed by the individual currently holding the throne. The suffering penitents are actually disturbed by Indra himself, who sends all kinds of temptations their way, from the most frightful to the most seductive, to defeat the penance and to have it stopped. Those who fail to dethrone Indra are overcome by their own fear doing the penance. Indra will do anything to keep his throne, but despite efforts to stay in power, the individual holding the Indra post must leave it after one epoch and again take a human body on earth. That individual who has Indra progresses higher while incarnate, still retaining his third plane subtle consciousness. It is important to understand that this individual titled Indra exists in his subtle body and inhabits the heavens while disembodied, but cannot progress in subtle consciousness until he incarnates again. In other words, Zeus must come down from Olympus, Jupiter must abandon the abode of the gods and become a man again to advance higher toward the fourth plane. There are 558 human beings on the third plane as saliks, and even more as musts are absorbed in the heavens between the third and fourth planes, but only one holds the post of Indra.
We have to just say that this is really, really revelations to me and very enlightening to me, because you always think of the goal as what you're pursuing, the seventh plane, but look at this, 100,000 years of holding the post as Indra, and then he still has to come back to take another human form,
to move
retain his third plane consciousness, to move on the planes higher to the fourth, fifth, and sixth, and seventh plane, which is the God-intoxicated state. But in these numbers described here, it shows what a lofty place that is, 558 saliks, and then some advanced must or God-intoxicated beings. So what, maybe there's 600 something or whatever of those souls on in the universe. And those are the souls who are aspiring for this lofty level. And what's another thing is to show how somewhat contentious is these aspirants seeking that Indra post. I mean, so there is a little bit of you could say interplay going on, you know.
And he doesn't want to give up that post easily, so he prevents people from getting there. So they have to go back to the previous plane.
It's amazing.
Are we being given a...
We're giving 1 minute, so I don't know if we have... Why don't you just read...
a couple of...
Well, the last chapter, the angels, so maybe that will leave on that.
The angels are the ancient gods of mythology. Indra controls the angels and assigns duties to them, making certain that each angel fulfills its duty in the proper way for the balance of nature in creation. Angels inhabit the second section of the third heaven, Deva Lok. Angels are the Devas who have only subtle form and no gross body. A pilgrim with third plane consciousness can see these angels as a normal man sees gross creatures. Angels do not pass through evolution in the gross world. Angels are those drop bubbles who remain stationary in the subtle world during the first 6 stages of movement in the ocean of nothing and never reach the 7th stage, the gross world.
Well, let's end on that, which give our viewers a little bit of maybe whetting their appetites to hear more about the planes and the angels and of course the heavens. So for Fred Stankus and Suhas Ginde, we thank you for watching. You could contact the Meher Baba Center. Until then, Jai Baba.
Jai Baba, and thank you.
Thank you.